I am Tom Nelson here, and today I have Barry Woods to talk to me from the UK. Let's go ahead and talk about how you got started in climate skepticism. Yeah.
I'm on Twitter as @BarryJWoods, is probably easiest to find me. I mean, it's a long time ago now. It was literally the leak of the ClimateGate emails, the emails.
Yeah.
And it sort of coincided with the run-up to the Copenhagen conference as well. I've done guest posts at various blogs and met quite a lot of people over the years and things like that. But I was just coming to it as a member of the public. I was on a motoring forum website, piston heads, and there was a climate change cat out of the bag. And it linked to what's up with that, and it's leaked from crew. I didn't know anything. IPCC, what's that? Independent Police Complaints Commission. Audit, hockey stick. I had no idea whatsoever. But what struck me was I sort of paid attention to it because of the Copenhagen conference and lots of alarmist videos, all doomed, and tidal wave, and Copenhagen opening conference video that was just a scare fest.
Yes, yeah.
And I sort of paid attention, and I looked at the re-understanding of the emails, what's going on in the background, or climate audit or real climate hockey stick. But I noticed the Harry README file. This poor guy that was trying to debug the code, and it was just awful, and the data management was just awful, and it just looked shocking to me. So I just got read into that, and gradually got sucked into read what's up with that, and ended up looking for an audit, and UK Bishop Hill and Joan Nova, Cheers Blackboard, the air vents, all those sort of blogs, and fracking consensus. I've done enough from board. And I sort of read this emails and read the Harry thing, and thought, well, it's going to be reported on the media, and it just went complete silence. Nothing. Dead silence. Everyone ignored it. I think the conference has got a lot of attention.
Yes.
But and I think then James Dunning-Pole had his Telegraph blog at the time.
Yes.
And sort of started talking about it. And then I think about a week later in the Sunday edition, Telegraph, Christopher Booker wrote about it.
Yes. Yeah.
Then it sort of gradually got more traction, and and then it got talked about. So I thought, yes, this will solve all these silly policies that are happening. Well, it's not settled. It's not the message of climate change. It's real and it's settled, and you've got to do these policies. Well, I don't care if it's 3 degrees, 1 degree, 6 degrees, or we're all going to die. The policy is just stupid.
Yes. Yeah.
But then 12 years later, we have Germany falling apart because they closed down their nuclear because of the Greens. But well, if you believe in climate change, why would you not?
Yeah, very strange. I was going to ask, before ClimateGate, though, for the years before that, did you think about climate change very much, or you didn't think about it?
I remember, and I think early mid-90s, thinking, company car in the UK, company car tax rules changed. So if you got a car with lower CO2 output, you might get a lower car tax.
Oh, okay.
That's just completely not interested, not aware, oblivious. From personal experience, I mean, I have a friend of mine for years as a climate scientist, but we met kids at nursery. I think I've seen that, and I mentioned it. Oh, go and look at Real ClimateGate, she said. And I did, and I think I survived 3 comments before being blocked and banned.
Interesting. Okay.
Which was and again, I spoke to her about 6 months after it. Said, all that emails, I was completely blown over. Nothing happened in the actual scientific community. I think 95% of sort of scientists just get on with their jobs. And you only hear the activist ones in the media, which I think a lot of actual scientists are probably a bit embarrassed about. All the doom and gloomers and the Kevin Andersons and all going to die and billions of deaths, all that sort of thing. But they sort of stick to their own field and don't question other fields so much.
Yeah.
But I knew climate scientists, I knew sea level rise. Well, actually, she said worst case scenario is 50 centimeters by 2100. I could back then from IPCC, the third assessment report, which is actually a co-editor of. Okay, that's. And the most likely scenario is this. Well, why the alarmism? And to some extent, who cares? If it's in science, no one cares about string theory or dark matter, controversial battles.
Yes.
But what happens is science says we've got to do this policy. Well, okay, so I think looking back, all the skeptics, which I would say, was looking, okay, well, the policy's done, but let's go and look at what the science says. And after time, you find out actually it doesn't say that, or it's something different, or if, maybe this, if, maybe this. So we focus so much on the science. Think, well, okay, I think I'm going to quote Steve McIntyre, a debate he did. If he was a politician, he would listen to the IPCC, because that's all you've got. But again, science doesn't say what to do about it.
Right.
It doesn't say to build a wind farm or nuclear power station. It doesn't say to abandon meat or do this or do that or do that. And what sort of got wrapped up in the last 20 years is the green sort of lobby has wrapped up their own ideology in it. So it's not just the whole idea of abundant energy. If you had there's a story from, I think, Solitaire Townsend, on which you can track down the transcript of, if you're talking to like 200 hardcore green environmentalists. Imagine a carbon trade waved a magic wand and you could have clean energy, but everyone still drove around, still consumed. Who would want that? And no one put their hand up. And she was actually shocked. It's actually quite an activist herself, working for a company called Futera, which was doing PR and worked quite well with the government. He even appeared in some of the ClimateGate documents.
Okay.
And it's so wrapped up in the reduce this, consumption is bad. Oh gosh, whole capitalism causes, industry, carbon dioxide. Oh, we've got to ban everything.
Right.
So and perhaps even if you were at the Extinction Rebellion sort of frame of mind, all going to die, extinction, all that sort of sanity, even then net zero might be the bad idea, policy-wise. You think actually fossil fuels are quite useful and they could protect us from the impacts of climate. But even there, it's just this ideology. It's like zero COVID. It's so extreme that it sets itself up to fail. And 20 years ago, we might have wanted to have nuclear. And we could have developed that over 20 years. It wouldn't have cost anything much. We could have done other things. Or coal, stop using coal so much, have gas. Well, forget CO2. That's probably better for the environment. Just particulates, things like that. But because it's this extremeness of it, I sort of got involved and just sort of tried to push back a bit. Just I'm stubborn, I think. I got fed up with being called a denier by anyone I talked to.
From your perspective, I'm curious, do you think that climate scientists, most of them, believe that we are currently experiencing a climate crisis right now? Do they believe that?
I don't know. It depends. I mean, everyone's got a different definition of crisis. That's a problem. What is the nature of the climate emergency? Well, I'm very sure that most climate scientists don't believe in the Extinction Rebellion version of that. In 5 years' time, in 10 years' time, all going to die, or human race is going to be extinct, or even any extinction. They just don't think that. There are a few that do, and they're the ones that get all the attention, all the media, and all the the lobbyists latch onto, and the politicians, all they hear, because any sort of nuance is just left. It's doom, or if you're not talking doom, you're denying the problem. Well, is there how bad? If you can look at the history of climate and weather deaths over the last 100 years, it's just 95% drop.
Yes, yeah.
And wealthier countries, you've got clean water, electricity, refrigeration, infrastructure, less impacted by climate events in poorer countries. So why the climate activists say, well, you can't let these countries develop because of capitalism or industrialization, it's bad. Well, that protects you from climate. The more farmed land is sort of managed and using fertilizer and all the modern techniques, means less land is used because the land we use is more productive. But we have lobbyists in the UK right now saying, we've got to stop producing meat. We've got to stop using fertilizer. And they say, what's sustainable? Other people might think sustainable means something completely different. If you're a farmer, sustainable means we look after land, we manage it properly, etc., etc., etc. But the green lobbyists are saying sustainable means, to them, means no carbon dioxide, no nitrogen, no this, no cow farts, no.
Right.
It's a language of debate. It's just no one even agrees on the word. So, climate emergency, well, what does it mean? What climate crisis?
Yeah.
Are we having one now?
So it does seem like here in the US, at least, there's quite a few politicians who actually believe that floods are way worse than they used to be, and droughts are way worse, heat waves are way worse, hurricanes, everything is way worse. And it's so urgent that we have to cut CO2 right now because everything is so worse. That's the climate crisis they believe in. But do you think scientists actually believe in that? I can't imagine that they do.
I don't think the scientists do, but the problem is the lobbyists do.
Yeah.
I mean, I don't know about the US, but I mean, I got involved a while back, and there's a Climate Works Foundation was set up over a decade ago, which does believe that. These big philanthropic, billionaire foundations are going to save the planet, and they do believe these things. And the Climate Works, they set up regional foundations, and in Europe, there's a European Climate Foundation, and they've been funding lobby Greenpeace and Climate Earth and WEF. All these groups have been lobbying for multiple different directions, politicians who are surrounded by think tanks have been funded. They're surrounded by that, and they're not scientists doing lobbies. It's think tanks that, yes, climate science is right. Yes, we're all doomed. We've got this to save the planet because we want to save the planet because we're good people. We spend that money, and there's billions gone into it. And so the scientists are not really that, are not what the politicians here. They're just surrounded by these lobbyists. I met David Rose, the journalist. Mail on Sunday journalist, then Mail on Sunday journalist at a climate debate the Oxford Union, Al Jazeera did, with Dick Lindsay there. Mark Linus. I think lots of skeptics got invited. And I was sort of looking into the European Climate Foundation because they just launched a website called the Carbon Brief, which is just which is run by an ex-Greenpeace person, which is basically just smearing all the skeptics then. And they were funded by this organization. And I looked into what's up with that blog post. But then we look at they're lobbying for anti-coal. So it actually boasts in the Climate Works annual report, we stop coal in the UK. And there were 20 grants, just 1 year alone, to UK organizations from all sides, at every angle, the politicians. And yes, Kings North, the last the new built coal power station that was going to be built, got stopped. And then all coal got stopped. And now we've got no coal. In 1986, we had 40% electricity from coal, and now we've got none. And the same organizations are now lobbying against gas. They're saying they're funding organizations like the Green Alliance to lobby, put 20% VAT tax onto domestic gas, which is 26 million homes, how they heat their homes, which would be a 300% rise on a tax, or meat tax. And then the same organizations have been doing it for years and years and years. It's not really the scientists. They're just, there to say science says. And all these people take everything as a given and just lobby to death. And it's a single issue. You get the net zero legislation in the UK. And that little video clip I sent you. The person quoting it is the former director of Green Alliance from 20 years ago, Rebecca Willis. The annual report then says we campaigned and lobbied against new built nuclear 20 years ago. But in that clip, she's been lobbying politicians for 20 years, but we've got no idea how to get there. Well, you lobbied for 20 years of politicians. She actually ran a climate leadership program in the House of Commons and MPs for 10 years to get them on board. But they signed up to this net zero, they made it law, they've had a climate change act. We've got no idea how to do it. And as typical politicians do, they set up an independent committee, the Climate Change Committee, to advise them. So, science is advising us, but the committee just ends up being packed with activists. They don't care about anything else. It's net zero. So, net zero. Okay, we need to 60% behavior change the public. Stop eating meat. Don't drive. Don't fly. Don't do this. Abandon your gas boiler. Don't. All these things that any politician would say, no. You're going to put tax on gas when gas prices are rising as a cost of living crisis. We're going to tax or ban meat. And they don't stand up to the slightest bit of scrutiny. But because there's been no debate, no discussion, it's a surprise all these lobby groups when the politicians eventually realise, no, that's just not going to work.
I do have a point here going back to this. Who actually believes in it, though? Because the scientists don't believe it, but the people in the lobby groups, or even like the Mike Bloombergs or the Bill Gates, or pick any name you want, Al Gore, I don't see anybody who's actually living any lifestyle themselves consistent with the idea that CO2 threatens to kill our children. I don't think even the believers believe.
I think so. Some of those in those groups are so entitled that so they can rationalize themselves. Unless everyone changes, it doesn't matter what I do.
Yes.
It's not about me.
It's about everybody else.
Yeah, it's everyone's got to do it. Because I'm even a billionaire with his jet. Well, that's just pointless in the scheme of things. I'm doing my bit anyway.
Right.
Again, I think they believe very shallowly. If you,
yes.
I made a point back in the day of actually trying to talk to people on the other side. I went to meetings like campaigns against climate change. I've been to Extinction Rebellion meetings.
You have, okay.
And all those things. I just sat there and listened. And most of the activists, even the people involved, they're pretty ignorant about everything.
Yeah.
It's just given to them. I mean, there's I think Ben was in a panel debate. Ben Piles in a panel debate with Roger Hallett.
Okay.
And also one of his XR colleagues on the BBC. And it's like 6 billion climate deaths. Got to do something. Well, okay, where does that come from? And he didn't know. Can you cite it? Can you quote it? And I spent a happy sort of afternoon tracking the quote down, and it turned out to be from 2009.
Okay.
In the run up to the Copenhagen conference, where Professor Kevin Anderson of the Tyndall Centre said, if by 2050 we had 4, 5, or 6 degrees of warming, the Earth could only support 1 billion people. So obviously you subtract 7.
Okay, all right.
And that was it.
Okay.
Obviously that's not going to happen. It couldn't happen. No one's saying it's going to happen. That's like an article of faith for them, which is transferred across the year, 12 years.
Okay.
I looked back at the XR literature going back to 2018 and the bit before that, and they brought a lot of stuff from the Climate Emergency Project or the Climate Mobilization Project from America.
Okay.
And you go along, and I eventually found, they quote Kevin Anderson as their source, but it's just lost in the depths of time. No one knows where own quotes come from, and it is nonsense. It's nonsense then. No one believes that then. Absolutely more nonsense that no one's going to think we're going to get 4, 5, 6 degrees of warming by 2050 and we need to support 1 billion people. But it's an article of faith.
Yes.
There's so many things like that. You could go back, but to even talk about how do you counter a soundbite? Someone's like XR, there's all going to die, science is settled, 97% consensus, all this. But you might take an hour just going with any one of those points and sound like a very pedantic person and nitpicking. Well, the rest of it's right. I mean, well, it's all whispers. Again, politicians, I think, latch onto it. Well, saving the planet is better than boring stuff, isn't it? It's ego, it's conferences, it's setting an agenda. 2050 would be carbon zero and green jobs and 2 million green jobs, as Boris Johnson. And 15 years ago, Gordon Brown, Prime Minister, said 1 million green jobs, and you find out actually they came to counting people that installed double glazing.
Yeah, I think Barack Obama promised 5 million green jobs, if I remember correctly, and they were counting bus drivers, and still the number came up to almost nothing. Yeah,
I think Ben Parley actually did an FOI request. It took a couple of years to find out what they meant, and it was just literally just double counting things that existed. But we've got to the point now where reality's caught up. The last sort of 12, 15 years, it was all pretty much hidden from the public. The green levies on the electricity bills or this were sort of lost in it, and things were far away in the future. But now we got energy crisis in the UK, and it's not Russians. It's been 20 years of policy. You lobbied against nuclear 20 years ago. You had Nick Clegg, politician, saying, there's a clip of him saying, if we start nuclear now, it won't be ready for 10 years. And all these lobbyists, we're lobbying against nuclear then because, if we have nuclear, we don't need renewables because renewables are green and we don't like big energy projects because that's capitalism or big. We want nice and greeny stuff, not technology that we know works. So that market gets fixed to the renewable obligation certificates. So wind farms get preferential access to the grid. They don't, why doesn't nuclear get that same benefit? Because it's nuclear. They lobby and lobby and lobby and lobby. They lobby against coal. The very same organisations that lobbying against coal now lobbying against gas.
Yes.
And they're just so fixated on the vision of the future is just no getting through to them. These are sensible people. I mean, I went to Conservative, I think I joined a Conservative party just to go and not quite heckle. You're going to moan about policies and politics, but go and join a party that's doing the done things. They can't throw you out to a member. You know, this is silly. A lot of people actually agree with you, but it's got such a momentum. But in the UK, we've got there's a Conservative Environment Network, and 100 Conservative Party MPs are part of that. And it's funded by the European Climate Foundation. They're pretty much doing their roadmap to 2050 that the European Climate Foundation of the Climateworks Foundation put in place a decade ago to literally use Europe as a guinea pig for policies.
Yeah.
They boast about their annual reports. You know, we got Kingsworth Council, they're lobbying against coal now and gas now. But those 100 Conservative MPs, they're wrapped in the neck with the European Climate Foundation. They've been lobbied to death by the Green Alliance for 10 years. Think tanks, all the think tanks have just all got this, you know, climate change is bad, it's all going to die. And there's just no sense of perspective.
Do you know where the European Climate Foundation gets their money? I think Ben mentioned that when he was on my podcast.
They initially started with, it was funded originally like 15 years ago, it's a Climateworks Foundation.
Okay.
I think it started with like $500 million from either the Hewlett Foundation or the Packard Foundation.
Okay.
And over the next 10 years, another 500 million went into it. Yeah. And there's even a Nature paper about climate philanthropy, you know, about that Climateworks Foundation.
Okay.
Over the time, there's been loads of other foundations jump in. You've got Oak, you've got McCormick Bain, you've got Rockefeller. There's dozens now. And right now, you get a lot of funding from the foundation that's sort of led by Sir Christopher Hom. And it's just, from a politician's perspective, they're just surrounded by it. We had a climate assembly in the UK. We had it a few years ago. I thought it's all going to wind down. You know, then XR came along, Climate Mobilisation Project, Climate Emergency, and it was a climate emergency, net zero, and Citizens Assembly to sort it out. But the European Climate Foundation were funding XR to get a climate assembly, to lobby on the streets, make direct action to get a climate assembly, and I think Sir Christopher Hom did as well. It's like £400,000. Just get on the street, put pressure on. And we have organisations like the Green Alliance, you know, actually quoting on our own blog. It's completely out there. There's no conspiracy. The Green Alliance, you have the Rebecca Willis, the former director, now an associate, saying, you know, the activists put the pressure on, and we offer solutions. We're funded by the same people, and that's where we get to where we are. But they all believe. I mean, you know, 20 years ago, that Rebecca would have been an activist, and we got recently all the climate assemblies. You see, they've got a new policy advisor called Helena Bennett.
Okay.
And 2 years ago, Helena Bennett was an XR social media organisation. You can track back her social media history and see her showing her XR tattoo on her arm. You know, and well, and the activists, when they grow up, you know, a lot of them just are going to do normal jobs. But the really ones that are really keen and want to save the planet go into the think tanks, go into lobbyists, go into the little charities and pressure groups. They move from those organisations to civil service and back again to the bigger think tanks, the bigger organisations, have whole careers out of it. But they're just as extreme ideology. It's net zero or nothing. Nothing else matters to them. You know, the fact that it might cost, or you know, bills might go up, or it's just got to do that. You know, future generations. So I actually went to a hustings, a Conservative Party hustings, with Liz Truss and Rishi Sunak. I was talking to the chairman of the local party, saying, look, cost of living crisis is going to kill you. Net zero is going to kill you. And he's talking about sea level rise in 2100. No one cares. You care about our gas bills tripling now. Businesses bills tripling now. I said, yeah, up at 2300, it might be a meter. Well, again, Netherlands is 6 meters underwater. Below sea level on back. We can cope, we can adapt, we can use them, you know. But it's like, he always looked at me like I was immoral, you know, not caring about future generations, because they're so, what about people now?
Yeah, exactly.
It's just a cultural bandwagon or phenomenon. It's not any conspiracy. It's just this. I think it's like, you could say the madness of crowds, but it's just, I guess it's like extreme risk avoidance with absolutely zero perspective. You've got to avoid the slightest possible risk, but by doing that, you create all sorts of problems. But no, you've got to focus on that.
I have two follow-up questions.
Yeah.
I'd like to know what it was like to go to the Extinction Rebellion meetings. And then the other one is, what do you think is the effect on the general public when Extinction Rebellion does all this crazy stuff and blocks traffic, and I don't know what else they've done. I think there's also tire extinguishers that are either slashing tires or deflating tires.
I mean,
how's that going over?
I was looking back 20 years ago, and you had a group of activists doing the same sort of thing then.
Okay.
Yeah, you get, and it's just the next generation come along and get scared by climate change.
Okay.
But I think the public just tired of it. But the activists are, they're passionate. Most of them are passionate. They really, really believe. Yeah, and they like to attack climate scientists for not being, activists enough. But the climate scientists don't actually believe we're going to go extinct in 5 years. But I went to some of these meetings. I mean, I talk about XR, but I went to one in the UK. There's a campaign against climate change. It pretty much was a shoestring organisation for a long time. I went to one of those, I think 2012, and they had Greenpeace, the Guardian's John Vidal, and Professor Peter Wadham.
Okay.
And it was literally doom, gloom, methane emergency group, which not even everyone, they were even embarrassed about,
Okay. Yeah.
And they're talking about, sea level, Arctic ice can be gone. And Professor Wadham has been all over the TV, all over the media. He's an outlier in the climate science community. I even, watched a Royal Society meeting where he was actually laughed at by other scientists. And the guy sort of doing live tweeting, he sort of commented on this, and Wadham went after him. He made a complaint to university. But back to that meeting, he's saying, all gone by 2013. And I'm sitting there, and some young man in a trench coat, 20-something, is actually stormed out the room. I can't take this anymore. I can't take this anymore. And it's like, well, I wonder where he is now, where 12 years later, when Arctic ice is actually higher than it was then, and it's not gone. But the next generation of actors come along and just repeat everything. But that said, I went to an XR meeting back in the early days, about 2019 or something, and it was in a sort of above a coffee shop in local town where I work, and speaker and lots of people. It's all very well scripted. I remember looking up the speaker's notes saying, don't ask questions, do this, do that, all these things. But it's like he really brought everyone down. And then let's build them up again to compare them to Rosa Parks or just activists that saved the world and made a difference, to actually encourage them to go out on the streets and glue themselves to roads, do this sort of thing, get arrested. And it was middle-aged people from Henley-on-Thames, very, very posh. And that was, but it worked. They literally got a climate assembly and net zero signed into law, because the bigger organizations came along, like Green Alliance, say, well, actually, we're not going to do a citizen assembly, but we've been pushing climate assemblies the last couple of years as a way to get past we have got no politicians telling them they've got no mandate from the public. Oh, so get this great big focus group, 100 people in a room, get all the experts to tell them things, and they can be the mandate from the public, which means politicians feel comfortable going along and delivering lots of policies the public might not like very much. But again, the Green Alliance's own research said, why are these politicians we've been lobbying for 20 years, had a climate leadership program for 10 years, why aren't they doing what we want? Why are they not getting legislation? They found out because the public, interviewed 20 MPs or 17 MPs, they just, public don't mention it, not from thousands of doors, never mentioned once. But they went away and came up with the idea of climate citizens' assemblies. XR come along pushing for a citizens' assembly, and the sensible solution is, well, we're not going to do that, but we can offer a citizens' assembly like they did in Ireland for abortion. We have a citizens' assembly about a specific thing, and that works. And we duly had a citizens' assembly, which is run and organised by all the activists, which I could go for hours on talking about. But Rebecca Willis was the expert lead, so she pushed for it, lobbied for it, becomes an expert lead on it, starts talking about nuclear, and well, you're the person that lobbying against it 20 years ago and boasted about it in the annual report. And you're a professor in practice. Well, so is Angelina Jolie and William Hague. But the 100 people in the room saw as an academic. It actually, you get people from outside academic, get an academic title, I think William Hague's as well, politician. But the public, this is an independent, scientist person, but
Okay.
a career lobbyist, a career activist, and did a PhD. And 8 months later, she's a professor in practice. The PhD she did was a research into the politicians. Why haven't we got a mandate? You look at her PhD, and it was directed by the Green Alliance.
Okay.
Don't interview these skeptic MPs. You want to talk to these people, and it was just unbelievable. So some of the expert leads. I don't know if Ben talked about this, but we had nobody from nuclear power there, but we had an activist that founded Age is Stupid, plain stupid, talking as an informant. We had, I remember him. He did the Trump blimp in London, above the blimp, Trump flying around London. He's a Labour Party activist, but the public there were, he's presented to them as a independent, neutral person. We had a guy called Jason Torrance as a UK Transport 100, and it's like a think tank and thing. Well, actually, he's just an activist that's grown up. Because 20 years ago, he was a co-founder of Earth First UK, anti-nuclear, anti-car, and spent this last 20 years lobbying against it. We had another doctor talking about public transport better over road use. But he actually founded an anti-car lobby group. It was arrested 3 months previous to an XR demo. And to lead, but the public were not told about that in the meeting.
Right.
And it's just their own little. We had the European Climate Foundation part funding it, but we're not in any way involved in influencing things. Well, you funded half the people, organisations that are speaking. And on the European Climate Foundation's own website, we're protecting it from outside interests. We had the communications team where the ECIU, which was funded by the European Climate Foundation, with Richard Black, the former BBC presenter, sort of running the comms. And I actually got blocked on Twitter for pointing out some of these things.
Okay.
I started commenting to journalists, why am I blocked on Twitter for commenting on these things? And why has this person, some professor, said to all the delegates, China is not, what about China, said one of the audience members, building lots of coal. They're not building any new coal power. Right? It's a lie. That's too fast. But they ended up, when the transcripts came out, there's a big proviso, this is not quite accurate. I mean, Ben Pyle wrote a report for Net Zero Watch about the Climate Assembly and how it was just, like focus group, the experts that got in charge of focus group and pushed the public in the direction they wanted to go. Well, they probably believe they're doing it in good faith. We are the experts, everyone's a denier.
But I'm sorry, this was an assembly where they were supposed to be hearing from the public. Were they supposed to be hearing from everybody?
Making a decision. Presented experts presenting to them about these issues. And you've got to make a decision as the 100 members of the public, recommendations to politicians about what the public wants. Based on read Ben Pyle's report on the Climate Change Assembly. It goes through a lot of it. I remember watching that and just looking at all these people, and he's an activist, he's done it. It was just this organisation's funded by these people that want these policies, and it was just embarrassing. So in some ways, that's sort of almost like a win, because I think I suggested to Ben, Global Warming Policy Foundation, they do something on this, and I think Ben put a pitch together to write something. I spent a lot of time around COVID just looking into all the detail. And it was just, the BBC did a program about it. It was like the public mandate to give politicians the mandate to do this. And I think you don't know the negatives, do you? But it was being pushed really, really hard. But that report came out, and it's so blatant, some of the silliness in there, that people who don't understand climate science or any of the issues think, well, actually, you've got anti-nuclear lobbyists doing this, or you've got the expert lead saying, oh, well, we don't want any climate skeptics there. Okay. Right. Or the lead saying, 3 years ago, writing to the BBC to try and get Nigel Lawson off the airwaves. They're blatantly activists on the subject. And whether or not they're right or not, you don't do it like that. You want to present to the public, you do it honestly, you present honestly, you tell people who you are. And it was just, a focus group session. I can make a fun example. There's one speaker there called Christine Liggett, and she was supposedly representing the youth. I represent the youth.
The youth, okay.
The youth, and in the question and answer session, how do you know you represent the
Really?
audience member? They weren't down, but they're pretty oblivious to what's going on around them. But how do you know that? And she says, I don't.
Okay.
It's just funny.
So a climate skeptic was allowed to talk, or
Well, no, it's just actually, it was done quite well. They tried to get proportion of by surveys what people are skeptical.
Oh, they did. Okay.
And that's just an obvious question. How do you know you represent these people? Well, that might not be a climate skeptic. It could be anybody. They're ordinary members of the public. And it was just an amusing moment. But I think in some ways you don't know. I think that would have been used like one of these 97% consensus, or the science is settled. Public. We've had assembly. It's what the public wants, and that sort of just died away. It's again, you just don't know. But the same organisations are lobbying for banning meat or big tax rises on gas, and I think they've never obviously had any debate with anyone, even not the climate skeptic, but anyone skeptical of the idea. Are you really going to put, increase the tax on domestic gas, which people use to heat their homes and have hot water and cook, by 20%, to encourage them to use air heat pumps? But even by the government's own figures, at 600,000 heat pumps a year, there'd be people on that paying that higher rate of tax for decades, waiting their turn to have. Are you going to do that?
Yeah.
Or ban meat? I mean, there's one story about we're going to reduce meat consumption or meat tax. And they've been lobbying it, but I'm looking at the Green Alliance website, been lobbying for that sort of thing for years, as had other groups, as had the European Climate Foundation. It got announced in the Times like Monday morning. And I was watching the Sun's environment correspondent, watching the story go throughout the day. And it's like, it's definite, it might happen, it could happen. Boris bans meat tax within the space of about 10 hours.
Okay.
The idea is it survived the public scrutiny for about 10 minutes, actually 10 minutes. This is a real thing happening now, unlike the last 10 or 12 years where it's all a bit hypothetical in the future. These policies are being really shoved through now, banning petrol cars, banning your gas boiler in your home by 2025, banning new ones. You can't do things that actually affect people's day-to-day lives. And that's where I think going forward, the last year or two, maybe going forward, all the arguments about wind farms that were made 15 years ago are still valid now, but they will actually be noticed by a lot more people now.
Yes, yeah.
And I remember, I think when I stopped blogging, so I thought I'm just talking to people that are skeptical. Maybe if we all took a holiday, if WhatsApp for that, Joan, every single blogger said, we're going on holiday for a year. Let's just forget about it. The activists would have to invent new people to be blamed for their policy failures.
Okay.
Anyone that questioned, is this a good idea, or should we do that? Should we do that? They'd end up being called climate change deniers. No, I'm just asking a question. And you might realize all those people being called climate change deniers before, well, actually, they weren't these evil people that are funded by big oil or this immoral. I've been running joke amongst people I know. It's like, well, the Exxon checks in the post.
Yes.
It's like individual bloggers with a free WordPress page and a Twitter feed versus all these hundreds of think tanks with billionaire-backed foundation, jobs and jobs and jobs and reports and dozens of reports. There's a whole career industry out there. And it's like, well, if that was true, they're doing we're doing on peanuts, and we're really, really good at it. Why not just fund us all 10 million quid and stop funding all these idiot think tanks and spending hundreds of billions on? And if we're so evil, we'll just retire and spend our money. Do what you want. I think that's sort of happening now. It's becoming more mainstream because the policies are actually affecting day-to-day energy policies, other policies are actually impacting on people now. And the activists and the lobbyists are getting quite strident again, because arguments they thought they'd won years ago. Well, there's never been a discussion or argument or debate. Politicians have just gone along with it because we're saving the planet, green jobs, green technology, conservative, manifesto from 2019, everything's going to be wonderful, investment, this and green jobs. Well, in that manifesto, meat taxes, banning this, banning that, 60% behaviour, none of that's mentioned. It's all, everything is going to be free and as good as before. Life will be normal. and it can't be.
Are you following what's going on in Sri Lanka, Netherlands, and Canada, where
Yes.
various crackdowns on
Yes.
fertilizer and farming and nitrogen pollution? I think it really does seem, like you said, it's coming to a head around the world. I think where the rubber's hitting the road, and
Well, in Holland particularly, I think it's not just the nitrogen. They actually want to stop 30 to 50% stop producing meat. Just stop it. And again,
that's to prevent bad weather, right?
Yeah, just stop farming cattle. Half your production of cattle. And again, that goes back to this. Well, if you've got a roadmap to 2050, farming is one that on the roadmap. Land use is on the roadmap. We've got to ban fertilizer because of this. You've got to get rid of cattle because it's high carbon footprints. And that is a European Climate Foundation strategy. And you look to the UK, we have the Conservative Environment Network. They've just got the two of all the candidates to be Prime Minister to sign the Conservative Environment Network pledges, which, like, one of them is commit to sustainable farming. Well, everyone, of course we want sustainable farming. Why not sign up to that? We can manage the land properly. But no, in their view, sustainable means, well, we will rewild things, we will stop using nitrogen, and we will stop meat production, because that's sustainable in their view. But these candidates are signed up to that, and they just don't know what they're doing. Same with insulation. We will insulate everything. Okay, to save the cost of living crisis. Well, on government figures, Environmental Audit Committee, it came back with 19 million homes will need £18,000 each spent on them, which is about £340 billion. And that was without an air heat pump. It was about £8,000 to £12,000. So about £30,000 per house times 19 million. Well, all the candidates of BPM signed up to do that. How much would you save a year if you went from an EPC, environmental performance certificate of a house from a D to a C? £170 a year, you'd say.
Nice.
You spend 30. Well, they've all pledged to do that. They just don't know what. They just believe in fantasies. They don't understand how anything works. Just think, oh, we'll just insulate homes. Well, okay, if we decide to do that, that could take decades. And who's going to pay? Or we've got 90,000 grants worth for 90,000 homes. Well, what about the other 25,940,000? None of it's going to happen, but they're doubling down to just do sillier and sillier things.
So how do you think it is going to play out over the next 2 to 5 years? Do you think the public is not going to take this, right? It can't.
I don't know. The public seem to take an awful lot, but I think this year, gas bills will just cripple people. But again, all the lobbyists saying, we need more renewables, and so, well, renewables have preferential access to the grid. So if you've got 27 gigawatts of renewable wind, and we've got 27 gigawatts of gas, renewables get it first. But clearly, we need gas because there's no wind, which means you can't actually buy gas in the future, so a month or two in advance at low cost. You've got to fill the gaps in wind at higher cost. But renewables are cheapest. Well, they're not if they're not delivering it. But still pushing this, and it's just quite scary. Maybe I think what scared me most was the farming stuff. I could not. Sri Lanka was bad enough. Holland, Germany, we're going to literally buy the land off farmers and almost build houses on it and take it away. Stop producing food, and the public can understand that. Again, in a lot of environmental people's view, food is too cheap. We waste food. So it's like, well, make it more expensive. And it's just this insane focus on net zero. We're all going to die because of climate emergency, but they can't or won't even define what it is. And you could ask 1 million people what a climate emergency is. They have probably 1 million different answers. From the Roger Hallam's, we're going to 6 million people are going to die in 5 years, which is nonsense. Well, maybe we should do net zero if that was true. But if it's not, well, why are we doing it? You can't even get that discussion. It's just so entrenched. In the UK, every political party the last 20 years is basically on exactly the same point. When the Climate Change Act came about, there's a video of Bryony Worthington, who's a Friends of the Earth campaigner, who ended up writing the act and became a law peer. And they were competing with each other. I think the Labour suggested 60% reduction by 2050. The Tories, Cameron came back with 80%. The Lib Dems hit 100%. And they signed it into law. No idea how much it would cost, or even if possible, or how to do it, or anything. They just did it. Then Theresa May, to get her legacy, signed it into law. So now all those Climate Works, all those foundations have been lobbying for climate net zero, are now funding organizations like Client Earth that a decade ago were lobbying against coal power to fight the government on every single thing. That's not in line with your legislation. You can't do that. You can't build this. You can't do nothing is compatible with net zero. They signed into law, the politicians. Oh, we want to do another couple of runways. Well, you can't. You've just signed it into law. You know what net zero means? Do you not understand it? But it's got to the point where reality is caught up, and the next year or two could be extremely painful. And my example of those 100 MPs that are part of the Conservative Environment Network, they believe it, and you just can't challenge them. I went to a Conservative Party environmental policy forum debate, and there's some chaps and Tory think tanks saying, "Oh, we'll have electric planes in 10 years, flying across the Atlantic, and do this, and we get no problems with this, and we can get rid of gas next," And there's another person on the panel debate, it's an actual engineer, just sort of chewing her fingers off the stupidity of it. But again, at that meeting, there was a breakout meeting, low impact energy sources, and they had, panel debate, and 100, 200 Conservative Party members from various parts of the country. There's a panel debate. There's a guy talking about wind energy, someone else talking about hydrogen economy, someone else talking about solar, someone else talking about something else, someone else talking about wave. And I thought, put my hand up. Okay, question for the organizer: where's the person from the nuclear power industry? There wasn't one.
Oh, okay.
Okay, are we trying to send a message here? It's like,
do you have politicians that are saying sane stuff like you are saying? Do they have the guts to say practical things?
I mean, there's a few Labour MPs a few years, the Conservative Party, I think there's like a net zero group, net zero watch group, but there's also net zero, 6 times bigger. You've got, and it's like a couple of MPs now part of the Global Warming Policy Foundation, or the Net Zero Watch. But I remember seeing on Twitter that, the Conservative Environment Network MPs, or that group, outnumber that group of Tory MPs by 6 to 1. But arguably, those guys just signed up for, save the planet, do this, do this, do that. And the other guys that have been signed up to the group are going to be demonized to death, probably better at arguing the point. I don't know if those other people fade away when reality starts sinking in. But I think it's got so much momentum. It's going to be a lot of pain.
Yes.
I mean, Germany is arguably worse. They are literally talking about industry shutting down, warm rooms for people to go to. Really, really, really awful. Again, that's 20 years of lobbying against energy that works versus, we can't have nuclear, we've got to have renewables. Because if we have nuclear, that discourages renewables. So you've got to stop nuclear to get renewables.
Okay.
It's happened in France, it's happened in Germany. There's a whole sort of green ideology about big is bad. And it's just, I think at the stage you sort of sit back and watch it unfold and say, I told you so. But my energy bills are double, tripling. My wife's business might go triple. I think we've got a fixed policy for another 18 months. But tens of thousands of businesses just could go bust because can't pay the electricity bill. Schools could close because they can't pay electricity bills. Swimming pools are closed. People worry about, or we give rebates to people on the lowest income. Well, their jobs will go.
Right.
Because if you're not public sector and your energy bill increases 5 times, that could be all your profit margin, and it's no end in sight.
What is the impression you get when you're just talking to ordinary people over there? Do they bring it up a lot that, boy, the weather's getting worse? Is that a thing?
None of them mentions climate change.
Me neither. No.
I think I'm always, you're talking to climate activists, it's like, well, we should talk to each other because the public don't care. They might just. I think what people forget is there's scare stories all the time about everything.
Yes.
Everything we give you, and it just washes over people.
Yeah, that's a very good point. Yeah.
Again, how many times has Prince Charles said we've got 10 years to save the planet, or 9? I remember at least 3 times in the last 30 years. You've got 18 months to save the planet. I remember when you said we've got 96 months to save the planet 15 years ago. Because now I'm saying it again. But the next generation of activists come along, the next generation of politicians come along. And just recently to this week, glaciers in Tibet, 1 billion of people not have any water. I remember that 15 years ago, and it was nonsense then and nonsense now, but the cycle continued.
It was fun for me because I actually visited Glacier National Park myself last fall, and I found a sign at the headquarters that said that looks like the glaciers are going to be gone by 2020. And I was there in 2021, and they were still there. They hadn't changed that sign yet. Kind of funny.
It's just a cultural phenomenon now. There's so much. It's just like a certainty. But reality is catching up. If you mean net zero, that means massive public behavior change, every level, and you got it costs the public a fortune as well. And no one's going to spend. I'm not going to spend £18,000 replacing my gas boiler. Home, do that. I know neither are 20 million other people. One, they can't afford to. They've got no desire to. But that's the government policy. By the Independent Climate Change Committee recommendation.
Independent.
I think you asked me what my thoughts of the future were.
Yes.
Again, it's sort of two thoughts on that. It's got such a momentum. It could go on for a long time.
Yeah.
But then again, it's so shallow what people understand. Like not the politicians about why they're doing things, and they just had sound bites for years. Renewables are the cheapest form of energy. Well, they're not. Otherwise we'd be having cheap energy right now. In the UK we've got lots of wind, but it's somehow not cheap. It's we've had things to support it, like 97% of scientists say, therefore we must do this policy, and it's all the other various sort of sound bites. And as soon as they get interrogated and challenged, is wind really the cheapest, or by more and more people outside of skeptic bloggers or Twitter people, just actual real people, and you see the media gradually going there, and cost of living crisis in the UK. Well, you've got gas bills that are triple. I thought we had the cheapest renewable energy. It's not.
Right.
So it could go on for a while, or it could just suddenly sort of bubble might burst. It's really hard to say, because for years there's such a momentum and such multi-side lobbying. There's been never any real debate. There's never any debate about how to do net zero or how much it would cost or if it's technically possible. It was just done. And you had that clip from Rebecca Willis on the Climate Change Assembly saying, well, we don't know how to do it. You've been lobbying the guys for 20 years, you've not told them how to do it. Fine. So I don't know, it could go either way. That's looking back, that's what I've been, my sort of interest was, I think I told you at the beginning that I was interested in, making tips to sort of various bloggers and doing poll on this. And I think my first blog post was skeptic alerts. We had George Monbiot in The Guardian saying, astroturfing, oil-funded people astroturfing his comment section. I think, well, actually, George, there's this campaign against climate change, which you were like vice honorary president of. They actually do that with the skeptic blogs. They get their activists to go and troll skeptic blogs to put comments in, including James Denningpole and Andrew Montford of Bishop Hill. And here it is. I've been to their website. I've signed up to the skeptic alerts. And I sort of gave a tip to James Denningpole. We duly wrote about it. Get your trolls off my lawn, George Monbiot. I think Telegraph blogs web. It's on his website now.
Okay.
And I thought, well, that's James's take on it, and that's I wrote up a blog post and just submitted it to Bishop Hill, and it's my first blog post.
Oh, okay.
Well, no one else is saying this, so I did some more for there, did sort of things that Joe Nova. I did quite a bit with say WhatsApp with that on similar things, but for the first year or so, I was pushing back on climate denier. You're either believe in climate change or denier. You're not allowed to talk. You're excommunicated from the BBC. You're just not even allowed at the table to talk. You're not a sensible person. So for quite a long time, I was just pushing back on that. And then you look at that language of, it's clearly activist type rhetoric, and you can recognise it, in any other political subject, Dept denial, it's just political rhetoric. But at the time, scientists were using it, politicians are using it, and I spent quite a long time pushing back. And it's like halls of shame with people like, this going back 15 years with Richard Lindzen and Professor Stott and other people, evil Exxon funded deniers. And I think my take was actually, well, okay, I'll go and people that are credited with that. I mean, there's George marshal of the organization called Rising Tide, and also the Climate Outreach and Information Network. And he was an ex-Greenpeace director, ex-activist, ex-rainforest person, came back to the UK, got interested in climate change. I got a little picture of him in 1991 saying the planet's going to die with a banner at a G7 conference. And 30 years later, he's still doing it.
Okay.
But he and Mark Klein is sort of credited on by some organisation as, that phrase. I mean, I think it should have been used before, but they actually credited the phrase. He's responsible for halls of shame. The campaign against climate change had a hall of shame. Otherwise, you've got to fight back against that. And so sort of cut board a bit. So I was pushing for years. I was sort of pushing back about that. And I was actually, I knew quite a few climate scientists, and I gradually got involved in debates, and I got to the point where actually, I'm not a climate change denier. I'm allowed to talk to people. But you saw pressure from activists saying, why are you talking to people like Barry or other skeptics, to UK scientists? Because they deny it, so don't talk to them. And again, I think that graphic I sent you, the social media network, I saw the research before it was published, and because the researcher actually asked it, so your name's actually on, everyone's name is on each node.
Okay.
Yeah. Should I anonymize it? So I was actually fine with it. But I was thinking at the time, the bit for the purple section in the UK is where, because it is the political debate was settled. It's not a political issue. Not Republicans versus Democrats. Every party in the UK was fully on board consensus. There's actually some discussion going on between scientists, chatting with skeptics and commenting on Bishop Hill blog, and then there's some person, the Bishop Hill blog was skeptical. Professor Lewandowski is climate skeptic conspiracy theorist, and we laughed like a drain because the comment he picked up as espousing conspiracy theory is a guy called Richard Betts, who happened to be the chair of climate impacts of British Met Office, who's just been, and again, we thought that's funny at first. And I'm in that data as well, and so am I. That's appalling. The psychologists going after people to label them as conspiracy theorists and nutters, whereas it's just another continuation of their deniers. They're just that sort of labeling. So I think a long time I was pushing back against that, and eventually you get to some sort of credibility. You end up on a panel debate with 3 climate scientists of the Open University about social media and climate change communication. It was with Joe Smith at the Open University. You might remember as being part of the actual seminars that the BBC had, that supposedly was a high-level meeting that stopped skeptics being here at the BBC.
Oh, okay.
I ended up in a book he wrote called Climate Narrators. But on that panel debate, there were 3 people on the panel. I knew them. It wasn't antagonistic. I met them before, talked to them before, chatted with them before. I actually suggested to the organizer, the actual person who did that research you saw, maybe he should go on that panel debate because it's social media research. And the organizer said, well, you'll have Warren, but why don't you come along as well? And there's like an hour-long video somewhere, it's on the internet, and me doing that. So I thought, well, actually, I'm allowed to be in the room. And I might be wrong, but I'm allowed to actually talk. I'm not a denier anymore. And that was for me very, very important.
Okay.
Actually allowing that to happen. But those people had a lot of pushback at the time. Why are you talking to these people? You had Bob Ward from the Royal Society, other people challenging, why are you giving these people information? Why are you even talking to them? So when we go with that social media network, that would just take the names off. I don't care who I'm talking to, but that might be a list of scientists that, you're talking to these skeptics. There'd be more pressure on them, stop doing that.
Oh, okay. All right.
Yeah, so that's why that ended up being anonymized. But it showed there's actually a debate going on. There's a discussion. It was very diverse. Actually, you were included. You were because it was on social media and Twitter. It wasn't in a silo on a blog. You weren't ghettoized. Anyone could talk to anyone, and if there's anything interesting, you have a chat about it. So that was, I thought, really, really positive at the time. That's a bit of a background there, but I think I spent a lot of time pushing back against the sound bites.
Good.
Which seems to be sustaining. It's the science is settled, 97%. All these other things built back better, renewables achieved. It's just these sound bites that are just pushing things forward. So I looked at the 97% consensus and did my own little. What else did the scientists say? Found the Doran paper. Actually, it was citing a master's thesis, and I tracked down the master's thesis online. It's 100-something pages, and in the comments, there's a lot of skeptical feedback from the scientists that took part in it. Science isn't settled. Man was wrong. All these sort of things. And it wasn't that I was proving anybody wrong. I was just saying, actually, it's more complicated than this binary. You believe, we don't believe. Again, looking back, skeptical science did not like that. I think that's when I got on their radar, because I ended up in, Michael Marrett, this watching the deniers blogger that ends up in a psychology paper researching skeptics. Hang about, how's that happen? You're researching people you're at war with.
I have a question about Michael Mann, because I've seen him many times say that he's being attacked by bots on Twitter, and I've never. Yeah. But I have not seen any Twitter handle that I recognize as a climate skeptic bot. I would like him to tell us.
I think they assume they're bots. It could just be people. I mean, again, I think climate scientists do get attacked by idiots on the internet that might be called skeptics. Some random member of the public who just seems some daft thing, knows very little about anything, and just there's something nasty to them. And it could even be because one person said something, another climate scientist gets in the neck, another climate scientist gets in the neck, and that's real. That happens, Again, so there's the opposite. It's just people being nasty to each other. And it's so much of that, any sort of possibility that debate of goodwill just goes. Again, in America, it's very much more politicized.
Yes.
So it's difficult to talk about for me from that perspective. I'm mainly coming from a UK perspective. These sound bites, are scary, because we had that time when climate psychology was going for people. I think you probably recall, NASA faked the moon landing, therefore climate science is a hoax. And it's like, just even the title seems designed to just say, oh, all climate skeptics and nutters, ignore them. And it's not just, they're oil deniers or creationists or flat earthers, or all these things. That was a little bit, it's worrying. It's actually psychology. People that, not climate scientists, but every sort of field seems to have activists in the field that are concerned about climate, that uses their field to write papers to do their bit. And I was looking back at that paper, and clearly the guy was an activist. He'd been fighting Joe Nova in Australia for a few years, blog posts and media and ABC and opinion pieces, a bit of a battle going on. And that was just think that's whether or not these people are the conspiracy theorists, nutters, we're all mad as hell. That's still outside the ethics of the field. Someone that's that much of an activist, he's literally researching people that, it's in his ethics approval, or I've got to hide my name so that they'd be foaming at the mouth if I was trying to get information out of them. Well, maybe you're not the guy to do that research. Something's gone wrong there. Eventually, I wasn't even that concerned about the people doing it. They're clearly activists can't help themselves. I was more concerned with the journals, the ethics departments, just allowing it. And even when you make complaints to departments, the journals, like, this is just wrong. You've got the guy for the second paper, it's the recursive fury. He's analysing the criticism his first paper got on the skeptic blogs. And he recruited a researcher, there's John Cook of Skeptical Science, but a guy called Michael Marriott, who runs a blog called Watching the Deniers. Well, okay. Are you a psychology student? No, he's a librarian, an IT person who runs a blog called Watching the Deniers that says that he's at war with these people. Well, how does he get to be a researcher on a psychology paper against a group of people he's at war with? And that was just the least of it. So there's quite a few papers like that, and there's other papers designed clearly to get into what sort of implyment, like there's an Alice in Wonderland paper, people skeptics just contradict themselves. Well, I looked up the quotes, and Ian Plyman said, the two quotes that could contradict themselves about CO2, like that has no effect, doesn't have an effect. Well, one was he's a geologist for one thing, and his first quote was in a book that was out of print, which I eventually got a copy of. And it was about Earth 3 billion years ago, when there's no oxygen in the atmosphere, CO2 is at 16%, completely different planetary atmosphere. And clearly CO2 had an effect then. And the other quote, which has no effect, was now, and it's like 0.004%, 0.04%.
Yes.
It's like, well, and they're like 9 years apart. So rather than, we contradict each other, it's like the Mad Hatter, Alice in Wonderland, it's just contradictory. Well, that's a provocative title. But why not just ask the guy, have you changed your mind? But no, it's purely, Ian Plyman in Australia was very, very high profile, skeptic, and they had to take him down. And it's using psychology to do that. I think enough people made enough fuss and enough noise. That's just blatantly bad to the field. And it seems to have faded away, the psychologizing skeptics as nutters, because, well, some of the questions that is can we have nuclear wind? I think nuclear is that's not nothing to do with climate science or climate change. But to be skeptical of policy is, in some people's view, is to be skeptical of science, just policy. So that area of psychology, sort of attack psychology, seems to have drifted away. We do seem to go into the area of nudge psychology, behavior change. We've got these net zero legislation. We've got to do this, but to get there, people have got to eat less, travel less, do less. How do we do that? And that's just, I think, a little bit more scary. It's not just so in your face. It's, and again, we've had nudge psychology unit. It's in sort of Downing Street is a behavioural change, not just climate change, just generally. I thought, well, there's ethics issues there. And again, we had that with COVID, and there's, I think, there's a State of Fear written by Laura Dodsworth that talks about the behavioural psychology units. It's just not for the greater good, clearly, but they're actually not actually debating people, telling them we need to do this. You're just doing best marketing or worse, manipulative psychology to get what politicians want. That's not the way to treat the public. It's really not. And again, if they find out about it, well, that's not going to be great for the politicians either. We clearly see that happening. We saw it happening in COVID, to make people, shame people to do the right thing, or tell them about their friends are doing it, and just all these subtle little nudges that you don't pick up on when you actually see, yes, they're actually planning this, and it's not great. But they're doing it with psychology on climate change, behaviour change, with public policy. You've got to get people to travel less, eat less meat, all these things. And you're looking back at the people involved doing this. In the UK, it's like the CAST Centre, it's based at Cardiff, and you've got various very high-profile professional psychologists previously working for years and understanding risk group. But the people who have been associating themselves are just climate activists. We had the expert leader climate change assembly called Lorraine Whitmarsh, she's a professor of psychology. There's an expert leader, 4 expert leads, and there are organisations at that event, one called Possible. And that was just the renamed 1010 campaign. Those are the video of the exploding children. And you're working with these guys, and age is stupid. These anti-plane activists and knows nothing about anything. And the other partner was like COIN, Climate Outreach Information Network, now called Climate Outreach. Well, the guy that founded Climate Outreach was the guy that 30 years ago was waving the placard at G7, they're all going to die. Came back from the rainforest, thought climate change is like the next Holocaust, they're all going to die. Really? And like he quotes his articles, like the Jewish people that could not comprehend what was going to befall them because it's so bad. And his thesis was, we're all in denial of climate change, just like that. And he's a guy who did a sociology degree in 1984, went off to stay in the rainforest and came back. And he's now running his climate change outreach information. It's working in the psychology department. And I think on some of the skeptical blogs, we've known, I looked into them ages ago from Campaign Against Climate Change and this organisation. There was a psychologist at Cardiff actually working with them as associates. The guy behind the halls of shame, the who's who of climate deniers, Mark Linus, George Marshall, the phrase climate denier. I think, why are psychologists working with the guy that invented the phrase climate change denier and had halls of shame? That's not great. But we had his colleague, who's an associate for like 10 years of climate outreach, and one as was at Cardiff University as well, called I think a guy called Dr. Adam Corner. He's now left the organisation now, I think. But his colleague, he's a guy that initially in the Guardian published a Lewandowski moon landing hoax paper, like a preprint. Before it had a press release 6 weeks later, and it went more mainstream. But he had been sent a copy by Lewandowski. You just write an article about it. And I think, well, hang about. He's an activist, clearly. I'd seen the guy go to a debate at the policy, I think it's a policy exchange, where they're talking about communicating climate change with a conservative right. And there's like Peter Lilly there, Benny Pizer from the Global Warming Policy Foundation, skeptical Tory MP, and the guy from Climate Outreach stands up and says, I'm a researcher, not a campaigner. And I think, well, are you sure? I mean, there's a video of you on Friends of the Earth marching the WAVE conference, climate change. You're at Copenhagen waving a banner, stop climate change chaos. You're a Green Party MP, and just in front of a bunch of MPs and he said, I'm a researcher, not a campaigner. How do you say that? And here's this photograph of you literally painted blue with a blue wig, waving a banner in London on the climate change march.
Yeah.
I really went to that debate, and I might have live tweeted it. It's just embarrassing. So either he's sort of separated his head, oh, I'm working now. That's my activism.
Okay.
How the public perceive that? I think I sort of tweeted about it a lot, and I ended up talking to the guys. You're trying to smear me with your photographs. Hang about, they're not my photographs. They're your photographs that was taken on the march that you wrote a Facebook page on the Friends of the Earth blog page. You're talking to MPs that you're not a campaigner. Well, I'm not paid for anything. Well, who says you were? And later on, he's doing research about communicating climate change. I think, guys, you've got some blind spots here. And he's talking about visuals. They had a project called visuals of how to change people's minds and get results. And he did research of focus groups of the public, and we found these photographs of activists. And there's a quite an iconic picture in the Guardian of an activist painted blue, and they found that the public hated that the most.
Oh, okay.
I'm surprised by that. I said, Adam, you were on this, and he said, in the same breath, he said in a video online somewhere, I think I was on that march. Yes, you were, and you were painted blue also. And he's sort of saying, I don't think the public recognise the authenticity of the activists. And I just think of a bunch of activists that are intolerant and won't. And he's like, you're a psychologist working for departments, government grants. This part of the climate outreach network, working with the Car Centre with a $5 million grant to change people's behaviour. And a guy literally founded an organisation who's founded Earth First UK. That going back to the quotes, going back to the thesis of the Green Party politician, did research on the roads movement. Earth First UK was so into direct action, it made Greenpeace know there was that militant.
Really? Okay.
Yes, and this is a guy behind the Climate Change and Eyes, and you're working with. And how is this field of psychology even working with these people? And the other organisation working with is possible with Asia Stupid founder, and you've got. I think it's just mad. We're going to nudge people to do meat taxes and put VAT as an incentive. We'll raise tax on gas to make people want to have heat pumps. And well, that's not going to fly politically, is it? Who's going to be the first politician to say, I'm going to put the Labour Party leader to the Conservative Party leader, Conservative warm home tax or hot shower tax,
Right,
but
right.
They're so fixated on net zero, nothing else sinks in.
So when you talk about the people painted blue, it makes me think of the Extinction Rebellion people wearing the identical red gowns and holding their arms out, and they're trying not to look like a cult. I think that looks exactly like a cult.
And looking at that research from climate outreach, it's quite good research. And they did research. They found out the public hated that sort of activist.
Yeah.
I didn't really understand why, but I did find out. But it's the same people doing the same thing. You look at Extinction Rebellion. I mean, some of the founders 10 years ago were doing similar things. The Extinction Rebellion came out of a group called Rising Up.
Okay.
And 20 years ago, George Marshall founded Rising Tide. Some of the people involved going back to Occupy, to the roads movement, all those things going back decades, just repeating the same thing time and time again. But in Extinction Rebellion's case, they got knocked into shape by another psychologist who's called Margaret Klein Salomon, who's the founder of the Climate Mobilization Project in the USA about 2014. That had you look at their website, quite a bit of success with the Democratic Party and the Green New Deal, etc., etc., etc. And she literally did knock them into shape with the climate emergency, the 3 sound bites. Before she came along, they were just really old school, symbols like clenched fists and this and left, very far left and complete unscrupulous nutters type. But she came along in the early days, knocked them into shape with the climate emergency, climate Citizens Assembly, and 2025 deadline. But that actually goes back to her thing in 2014. We've got 10 years to save the planet. But no, when coming on to 2019, 2020, they still got the same, that 10 years is now 5 years closer.
Okay.
It's all about
Yeah.
the same possible deadline. They don't seem to realise that. But again, looking back at her profile, she again believes sincerely, looking back at all the work when it was a shoestring organisation in America in 2014, no money at all. Can you believe the climate catastrophe like Roger Hallam, all going to die extinction? There's analogies with, it's climate holocaust going, millions of people, billions of people are going to die, really, really scared, really focused, they're really, really motivated, because they really, really do believe these guys. It's clear, you just watch their YouTube videos with 50 views, they really, really do believe. But again, this lady now is actually, because XR was so successful, that occupying that bridge in London got worldwide attention. The activists put the pressure on, the Green Alliance came along and got the Citizens Assembly, they got the net zero into law, not 2025, but net by 2050, which is just as mad. But that was the compromise. The activists put the pressure on. The money that funded these organizations put the pressure on, got the results, and here we are. And it's as simple, you can just look into it. How did this happen? Massive organization, governments, politicians just literally fall along with catastrophism, doomerism. And it just doesn't hold up to any scrutiny. And again, even if, just in case it might be 3 degrees by 2050, well, you want fossil fuels to protect yourself against it, because we are protected in the West from a hurricane, whereas a typhoon in the developing part of the world might kill thousands because they haven't got clean water or infrastructure. People die because of diseases afterwards. They haven't got the hard wealth, and as in things we take for granted, protect you from climate change impacts.
I do think Alex Epstein says it really well. He said that fossil fuels didn't take a safe climate and make it dangerous. It has helped to take a dangerous climate and make it much safer for us.
Yes, absolutely. I mean, you can see the world in data graphs, deaths by climate and weather over the last 150 years has gone down 98%, 95%. It's just dropped and dropped and dropped. As quality of life has gone up by every human measure, life expectancy, child poverty, etc., etc., etc. But somehow the catastrophism, the very, very loud, scared voices, they've just, everyone's gone along with that. So going back a few years, there was a report in the Guardian, 300,000 climate change deaths, and it was a nonsense report by Global Humanitarian Forum, but it had Kofi Annan signed up to, all the scientists signed up to it. I think, remember looking back at the Guardian article, people getting a copy of the report and pulling apart that's just nonsense on the day it's published, but the Guardian pushing it, 1010 climate change actually group pushing it, 300,000 people dying this, we've only killed 5 people in our video. I remember exchanging Twitter comment with Franny Armstrong, who founded 1010 Climate Action. A few years later, I sent you the tweet, and she said, actually, that was wrong. It was a bit dodgy. We don't use it anymore.
Really? Okay.
Yeah. But I remember seeing an activist on top of Kings North coal power station, they camped out, climbed the tower, 300,000 people are dying of climate change. This is why I'm doing it. There's people on the roofs of the Houses of Parliament, Greenpeace, 300,000 people are dying of climate change. And again, you look at the report, it was like, well, an extra 2% might be dying of climate change because of a bit more dysentery or malaria, an extra bit here, an extra bit there. It's all really stitched together nonsense. And it's like, well, okay, well, but if those 300,000 people are dying of secondary order things, you don't care about the 3 million people that die in the same thing,
Right.
And solving climate change, or if it was true, you might save those 300,000 people that are dying, but you don't care about the 2.7 million people dying of natural causes.
I'm confident.
If you solve those problems, you give them clean water, you did that, you stop.
Absolutely.
And you will actually, even if climate change impact, if you cure, stop malaria, which you could do, you save the climate change deaths as well, and the other 3 million people. But they're so fixated on saving the planet, attacking big oil, attacking this, that they completely forgot about the boring stuff.
I am very confident that the real number of people that have been killed by CO2 induced climate change is 0. I would say 0 people now or ever. From 400 or 420 parts per million CO2, nobody. And they never produce names of anybody who was killed by climate
where
change.
the bodies, It's like all the million species gone extinct. Well,
exactly.
You look up, well, actually that's some paper on an island, it's extrapolated on data, that the data itself says, don't use this to extrapolate. But it's nonsense activist science papers And they get into the media because they get the headlines. But most of climate science is not like that.
Right,
But from a
right.
public's perspective, I mean,
Yep.
I think, remember, a long time ago, I was saying to climate science, or even on my blog, when it comes, chickens come home to roost on this, and we got suffering from policies because science says, well, who's going to be held to blame? I'm just at Barry J. Woods on Twitter, basically, these days.
Okay. All right.
I do have a blog, but I haven't actually put anything on it for years.
All right.
Again, I've put stuff on what's up with that, because I thought, if you're on a skeptic blog, you're just talking to people that I don't need to be talking to.
Yeah.
Right back at the beginning of this, I thought, rather than say why this person's wrong or that person's wrong, I'll actually go and try and talk to that person.
Okay.
And say, actually, I don't want to tell people you're wrong. I'm trying to tell you you're wrong. Or you want to persuade me I'm wrong. It's right. I actually talked to Mark Linus, the guy behind the Climate Change Hall of Shame with George Marshall. And again, on I think Julius Curry's blog, I've met the guy a couple of times, even though we live. I gave him a lift to a debate once.
Oh, really?
It's like, because you get to know people, you can't call each other names. We actually said on this Curry's blog, that Hall of Shame was shameful. He met Professor Lindzen years ago. He's in the Hall of Shame at evil Exxon funded denier, and he said, "Okay, would you say that now?" And he said, "Well, he still thinks he's wrong, but wrong in interesting ways. But he's not. It's evil. It's caricature, an activist caricature.
Absolutely.
That has polarized the debate so much. There's been no debate possible, even discussion. And I'm not talking about debate about science, just policies. That if it's 1 degree, 3 degrees, 6 degrees, that policy could still be done. Absolutely. The wrong thing to do. And I think I put a link on my Twitter profile to my last sort of what's up with that blog post, which I said I thought the science was settled enough years ago to do some action. Okay, we don't know. The activists think oil knew about CO2 30 years ago. Well, so did the government.
Right.
But they've got this analogy in their head: the tobacco science hid science. Tobacco scientists hid science. Well, obviously the oil industry is doing the same thing, but they were just repeating what's in the public domain. Again, but they also knew, okay, we use these things are useful. This could be bad, but we are still using these things because they're good. We're useful. And what were they expected to do? Shut down the oil industry. Well, the government could have shut down the oil industry anytime, but they choose not to because their products were useful. Sorry, that polarization is so bad. We've just got to a state where no one could discuss anything because of the activists make so much noise over the last 20 years. And only now, I think, people are able to start discussing some of the policies and choices in net zero, because there's more people noticing, energy policy crisis, this or that won't work, or this won't work. There's now more and more people actually, well, okay, we still believe in climate change, still got to do net zero, but actually this might not work. We might need to fire a coal-fired power station this winter to keep the lights on. And the activists are still going insane. But more and more politicians and normal, regular people are asking the same questions. So the whole last 15 years sort of debate that's sort of like the phony climate wars are now very, very real. And more people either end up being called names and shouted down, or an actual debate will, on policies, not science, will happen, because science will always be right. Climate science is right now, is right 30 years ago. At the best of our knowledge at the time, if you look at the consensus of all the work, that's what we know. I don't know about America. Are they sort of doubling down on the energy policies? Or
yeah, we'll see. I mean, just the recent bill that passed looks pretty dire for sanity. I think it's incredibly crazy to spend all that money, 369 billion, trying to prevent bad weather. But
what are they doing? What's the bill actually do? Does it ban more renewables, ban more fossil fuel?
Good question. I don't know exactly what, but I know what it's not doing is it's not going to have any measurable benefit on the weather or climate ever. I know that much. So whatever.
Anyway, back to your question. I just remembered on my Twitter profile, I've got my last blog post. It's written a long time ago now, but I think it sort of still stands up pretty well about where I come from, and where I think the future is going. And the science was settled enough to do something, but not the XR something, or not the Greenpeace something, not the other something. We could have had nuclear power, and that would have been better than coal. It'd be less particulate.
Yeah, I think we covered a lot here, and I really enjoyed it. So thank you very much, Barry Woods.